disappear. That is, they don't want to be in the present. They don't want to be where they are. And alcohol lets them not do that. Remember, young people won't remember that they used to have commercials on TV when they were trying to teach America about depression. And they would say, do you have depression? Are you sleeping too much? Sleeping too little? Remember those? It had that calm voice would read all those symptoms on the TV. I remember that as a kid thinking, sleeping too much, sleeping too little. How can these both be symptoms of the same thing? Of course they are, right? You're really sad. Sometimes you lie awake, anxious, trying to deal with it. Or sometimes you use sleep as an escape. I just don't want to be here, and so I flee into the arms of slumber. But I can't get to sleep, but alcohol gets me there. And the problem with this is, if you're sleeping when you shouldn't be sleeping. Isn't that right? Anybody ever been sleepy when you weren't supposed to be sleepy? Yeah, hadn't you been to church before? Matt's up there propounding the Word of God, and he looks out, and here's the congregation. Right? A friend of mine and I were talking once. This friend drinks a lot. He's not a Christian either. And we were talking about alcohol. He said, look, and I was saying, I'm not saying there's something wrong with having a drink or two, but going ahead and getting drunk is pretty problematic. And he said, well, yeah, if you're driving or, if you're a surgeon trying to work in the operating room, it's a problem. But if you're just home by yourself on a Friday night watching TV and you get drunk, who's getting hurt? Well, that seems like a pretty relevant, pretty significant kind of argument. I said, well, that's pretty fair, but what if your mom calls you and needs to talk? What if your neighbor falls down the stairs and needs somebody to pick him up? Do we have a responsibility to people? Now, you can't stay awake and ready all the time, but if I'm asleep and you call and need me, I'll wake up, I'll shake my head, it'll take me a minute, then I'll be ready. What if I'm passed out drunk? Well, I'm not ready to help. Does that make sense? Now, the mistake would be to hear that and think, aha, one could never have anything to drink because it would dull one's senses a little bit and you might need to work a math problem real quick or something. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there are principles apply. We want to think that my body is me, my body is mine, nobody else has a claim on it. What I do with myself is my own business. I'm not hurting anybody else. That's it. But the truth is that God has made us social creatures. All of our talk about individual human rights that we based our country on and that we base our larger ethic on, there's some good things about that, but it also blinds us to something pretty important. And that is that we don't have rights. What we really have are responsibilities. What it is to be a person, here's one answer, is not just to be a body, a mind, a soul, but also to be a person in community. To be a person, be a human, is to be somebody's son, somebody's daughter, somebody's brother, somebody's sister, somebody's friend, somebody's boss, somebody's wife, somebody's husband, somebody's neighbor. And one of the things that alcohol can do is make us, especially when taken to excess, bad husbands, bad wives, bad fathers, bad children, bad neighbors, bad friends. Brother Ben. A dry drunk. So when Ben talks about a dry drunk, that means somebody who behaves one way when they're drunk and then they get sober and they don't go back. Well, if we were talking about our addictions and whatnot again, we would talk about your brain, the way your chemicals in your brain work. This is a gross oversimplification, but it works like walking through a forest, right? On campus even we have this. We have, buildings on campus and lawns and green spaces in between, and we build sidewalks. But one of the things that they try and do when they're smart before they build a new building is don't build the sidewalks at first, because what will happen? There it is. Dad said, students will walk in a different path than where you expect them to walk. If you make a sidewalk that goes around the front lawn, you know what they'll do? They'll hop it and cut across, and they'll cut across at about the same place. And after 3 or 4 weeks, what's going across the front lawn? The path, right? It's beaten down. It's easy to walk on. Animals do this too. Your brain works this way. When you make a choice, when you think a thought, when you go on a behavior, the neurons, electrical signal fires down one path. Well, you walk through a forest one time, there's no path. But how about if you walk through it 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, 20 times? Pretty soon the undergrowth starts to part, and it's easy to go down this path. This is just how habit formation happens. How many of y'all, when you wake up, think about brushing your teeth? When I open my eyes, one of the very first things I want to do is get up and brush my teeth. You know why? I do it every morning. That's a fast path in my brain, right? It's become a habit and so forth. And so this is part of what this dry drunk phenomenon is. When you spend so much of your time intoxicated, those patterns of behavior become normalized, right? Become habituated. One of the things I haven't mentioned, at the end of the class, I'm going to bring in some resources, both like resources for help and also some of the books and things that I read for this. But I'll tell you one book I'll mention now, though. This is not a Christian book. It's a medical book, and it's not an easy book to read. It's about bad things, and it describes some of those bad things. But it's very honest. It's an addiction specialist out of California. Her name is Lemke, I believe. And the book is called Dopamine Nation. Dopamine is the chemical in your brain that gives you pleasure. Okay? When you experience pleasure, your brain is releasing dopamine. When you take a hit of drugs, you get a dopamine release. When somebody tells a funny joke, you get a dopamine release. This book is about the way that dopamine works and ways to help think about that. And so she's writing about addictions, not only chemical, but also process addictions, like we're talking about here. Really good book. We're talking about all these different ways in which wine, alcohol, etc. makes us foolish, can make us act like a fool. Drugs too, right? You ever talk to somebody who's high? They're just kind of not even there, man, right? You're trying to have a conversation with them and they're just sort of spacey, right? Had this kind of thing. One of the things that we imagine sometimes is that drugs and alcohol clear our mind. And there may be a sense in which that can happen. This is some of what we're doing with things like antidepressant medication, anti-anxiety medications, et cetera, is the brain's behaving in unhealthy ways, and we try and come in and adapt those chemicals to operate in more healthy ways. The goal is to help somebody get back to normal. Make sense? Sort of like if you walk with a limp, it's because your body is trying to, make up for a deficiency. You got a hurt foot on one side, and so you put all your weight on the other foot. Well, if you want to get back to normal, what are you going to have to do? Press weight on that other foot, right? And so sometimes what we're doing with prescription drugs, what a physician or a good, wise counselor, psychiatrist, et cetera, is trying to do is to help do what do for your mind what a physical therapist does for your body. And there's a role for that. There's a way of understanding. Well, we have bodies, and that matters. The problem is if you're just trying to do your own physical therapy. Isn't that right? I wish Jacob and Steffi were in here this morning to say amen. Right? Because when you're doing physical therapy, you don't always have a sense of, I know what to do. Sometimes what ought to happen is exactly counterintuitive. And the same thing happens with these chemicals. Brother David? It says you forget about God when you're into Him. Okay, so it says when you're into drugs and alcohol, you're not thinking about higher things, you're thinking about lower things. Paul says, right, don't get drunk on wine, but rather be filled with the Spirit. They're contrasted in this way. Contrast way. So one of the great dangers with alcohol and drugs is they can make you look like a fool. And of course, the problem is lots of us, We kind of want that. Tell me some reasons why people might say they want to have a little drink in the evening. To do what? Relax. Take the edge off. Isn't that right? What they mean by that is, I'm all wound up. My social situation or bodily activities, whatever it is, have got me all tightened up, and I need to relax. And I feel bound by this, and the drug or the alcohol releases my mind such to get me back to normal. One of the things that was important for me to understand when I started researching this class was we treat drugs and alcohol frequently like they are a problem. Like drugs and alcohol are a problem to be solved. And one of the things that I learned that I think is important is this. Drugs and alcohol are not usually the problem. They are usually a false solution to a problem. Let me say that again. Drugs and alcohol are not usually the problem. They are usually poor solutions to a problem. I come home and I just cannot relax. So I need a couple drinks to take the edge off. What's the problem? Stress. I'm keyed up, right? What's the solution? Well, this chemical that masks the stress. What we might want to ask somebody is, how come you're so keyed up when you come home in the afternoon? Well, I just can't stand my boss, and he's driving me crazy and breathing down my neck and blah, 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 right? Well, does taking 2 drinks fix that? Now, you hadn't changed anything about the situation that's causing you the stress, isn't that right? Oh man, my girlfriend broke up with me and I'm heartbroken. And if I smoke a little weed, I feel better about it. Does that bring her back? Does that make you the kind of person somebody wants to be with? Does that prepare you to move on? You see what I mean? They're usually a short-term and most of the time ineffective solution to problems. That is, at least when they are used as solutions. Now, when Jesus makes 150 gallons of wine at the wedding feast at Cana, is he trying to solve problems for the people at the feast? I mean, he's solving the problem there wasn't any wine, but is the drinking of the wine there to fix something? Are people coming to the wedding and they're going to have an extra drink now at the end because they say, I just can't relax. I need to take the edge off here. You think that's what the bride and groom are saying? Why do they want to drink? Why do they want to drink at a wedding? To celebrate, right? That is, we are drinking in celebration. It's not about trying to solve the problem. To me, this is one way of understanding why would Jesus make alcohol? Why would Jesus inject something risky into people's lives? And that, I think for our last 10 minutes or so, I want to come back to this wisdom principle. When we talk about this, even the way I've been talking about through class, if somebody said, what was the takeaway from Mac's class today, you might say something like this, don't use drugs and don't drink. Doesn't that sound like a kind of fair takeaway from what we've been saying in here? Because we're talking about risk, 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 risk. Well, is driving a car risky? I bet you it is. Very risky. How about listening to music while you drive a car? Does it make it riskier? Yeah, it does. How about having a conversation with somebody while you're driving a car? Does that add risk? It does. How about yelling at your kids in the back seat while you're driving a car? How about thinking through what you're going to be having for lunch today and what you need to pick up at the grocery store while you're driving a car? Do all these things make it more risky to drive a car? How many of you did this today already? You think you did something bad? Yeah. Gotcha. You think she did something bad? They add risk, but what? Why is it not bad? Why don't you feel guilty about it? When Matt preaches the sermon and says, let's stand and sing, nobody's going to come forward and go, I put myself and other drivers at risk today because I had the music on while I was driving. Why won't you do that? Why don't you feel guilty about it? It's manageable risk. Isn't that right? It's manageable risk. If you live in the world, can you avoid all risks? ought you try to? No, not all risks. Why not? What will happen if you spend your life simply trying to avoid risk? What will happen? Well, you won't have a life, right? If you are constantly seeking to find safety and avoid all risks, you're going to end up not being alive. Matter of fact, in trying to avoid certain risks, you ignore other risks. Isn't that right? One of the things that I say a lot of times when I'm teaching my students about courage, or I'm talking to parents about courage, is this. If we let our children just run and play. We had some friends over yesterday, and they have a little 2-year-old, and he was out in our big backyard and walking down by the creek and walking around, and Judah was with him. My 11-year-old was with him, but he's a little boy, and they were in a new place. He hadn't been here, and they're from the city, and so, this is all different for him. And I noticed it's their first child. These parents kept doing this. What were they doing? Mama, you know what they were doing. You're probably worried about that kid right now. What do they want to do? They just want to put their eyes on him. Just put my eyes on him. And you want to do that so that you can be sure that the child is safe. Isn't that right? What's the danger? What risk are you ignoring in that? Oh, maybe the child will grow up to be cowardly, not independent, not able to navigate the world well, right? Fearful, etc., etc., etc. So I oftentimes will say, we're afraid of all the wrong things. The biggest danger that our children are facing in the world today is that they'll grow up to be cowardly. That's the danger we're facing. Now, if we talk about the risk of being foolish with alcohol, and we're so terrified of this, you can imagine how this can go wrong, right? We see somebody at a wedding toasting, right? Champagne, they're having a toast, and we go, ah! This is terrifying! Their whole life's going to fall apart. Evil. Right? One of the things that I've talked about where I work at Harding, we have a no drinking policy. And for many years, the rule was if you had one drink, no matter the circumstances at all, it was a one and done. You're kicked out. And I was talking to some administrators about this, and I said, one of the things that we are communicating to students, I said, with these rules, we are teaching something. We're not merely enforcing rules, we're teaching something. And one of the things we're teaching here with this zero tolerance policy is, this is a really bad sin. To even have one drink, really, really dangerous. But there are other things that students do that are more dangerous that we don't even have rules about. Here's one. If you get pulled over for driving 115 miles an hour on the freeway, you get a big ticket, state might take your license. Harding has no rules about that. Church didn't have any rules about that. Was that a foolish thing to do? Yeah. More dangerous than having a drink? I used to go camping all the time with my buddies. And we were, when most teenagers in Arkansas, a bunch of guys say they're going out camping, what are they doing? Drinking beer in the woods. That's what they're doing, right? But we were good boys. We were church-going boys. We did not ever drink a single drop of alcohol out there at Clint Lurcher's family farm where we would go camping. What we did was put gasoline in a super soaker and then light it on fire and about burn the fields down. What we did was decide to try and drive Clint's truck through a pond without thinking about how deep the pond was. Right? What we did was write our names in gasoline on the ground and then throw a match on it and watch them spring up to life. We played fire a lot. We went out on the highway and we thought we were such good Christian boys, we thought we would put up some Christian art on the highway in front of Clint's house. Poured gasoline in the shape of a cross on the road and then lit it. You wouldn't believe that the flames will go 8 feet high in the air, but they will. And you might think nobody's driving down that road at 3 in the morning and sees a huge flaming cross, but somebody will, and you have to hide in the ditch to avoid all that. We were looking back on that one day, and one of my friends said, we'd have been a lot safer just drinking beer out there. Now, of course, the better option is not to say we should have just been out there drinking beer, or we should have been out there, playing with gasoline, fire. Both things are foolish, right? But we imagined that we were being good and wise by avoiding one risk and thereby blinded ourselves to other risks. What God calls us to is not an approach to any topic, right? Whether it's drugs or alcohol or prescription medications, whatever. God doesn't call us to try and live in such a way that we never do anything risky. Matter of fact, God puts us right in the middle of a really risky world. Really risky world. Riskier than most of us wish it was. Amen? Are there not any moms in the audience today? Right? I wish the world were safer than it is. And he says, I trust you to make wise decisions. And I'm here for you when you don't. So, if we're thinking prudentially about the right way to mitigate this risk of foolishness, we might say something like this. Recognize that when you drink a little bit, the risk goes up some, but when you drink a lot, the risk goes up a lot. Isn't that right? Isn't that right? Thomas Aquinas, another famous theologian from the medieval period. I know y'all don't feel like it's been class if we hadn't quoted two medieval theologians here. Aquinas said, how much should you drink? It was sort of like in Jesus' day, wine was the normal table drink of his day and age. And he said, one ought to drink to the point of hilarity, but no further. What he meant was, as soon as you start feeling a little bit loose, immediately stop. He said, that's where we are. Sort of like when you're driving, how close to the line, to the white line, should you drive? Well, there's not exactly an answer for that, but if you're hitting the rumble strip, you better correct. Isn't that right? And what Thomas thought was, when you start feeling a little bit hilarious, like you're laughing a little too quick, you better recognize, I'm off the road, and stop. And you might say, you know what? For my situation where I am, I think the best thing to do is to not touch it at all. That's the right decision for me in my life. And Christians got to have wisdom. Maybe you even say, that's the right decision for my life, but I really wish it weren't. I wish I didn't have struggles with mental health. I wish I didn't have a history of addiction in my family. I wish I didn't have a social location in which people will judge me for drinking alcohol. You might wish all those things were different, but still recognize them and say, but given where I am, here's my best yes. Here's my best decision. So we'll pick up there next week and we'll talk about what are some of the risks and dangers that come, especially historically, with the church in a teetotaler position. Risks like being judgmental. Risks like making laws that God hadn't made. Risks like going beyond what God has revealed. And we'll talk about some of those things next week. Appreciate you guys being here.